Stephen Dempsey. Sorry for my recent absence. I actually moved to Europe. I'm in France right now, but I'll be traveling all over Europe for the next few years. Also, I had some pretty serious issues with my laptop that required a complete system reinstallation, so I had to do that too. So with all that out of the way, I decided for this tutorial to do a start to finish edit using version 2019.2. So let's get right to it. I'm going to use this photo. Let's take a look at it. This is just outside of where I'm currently staying. It had some potential when I saw it. I liked the light, but the sky is sorely lacking. And it's really not very exciting. So I want to see what I can do to spice this up a little bit. So we're just going to go in to develop, just to get it going. So I'm really going to do nothing other than boost the shadows a little bit and a little bit of the midtones. Just to that, that's it. What I want to do actually is I want to replace the sky because that will give it something a little bit more interesting. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going over to the mask tool and I am going to access the AI masking brush. And AI stands for artificial intelligence, as you know. And basically the concept behind this is that it's a tool that's set up to make masking a lot easier. You don't have to sit there for minutes or even hours at a time trying to make these little selections by basically just kind of defining broad areas. The computer, or at least ON1, is going to be able to recognize what you want masked and what you don't want masked. So let me show you how it works. So basically there are two modes. There's drop and there's keep. And keep basically means that it's going to keep the original photograph intact, so free from the mask. The mask is going to allow the effect to show through whatever we decide to do with that. And in this case, we're basically just going to cut out the sky. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually keep it on drop. And I'm just going to increase the brush size a little bit by hitting the right bracket on the keyboard. And I'm just going to draw this around any areas that are the sky, and I'm just doing a kind of making sure I cover all the different tones here. That's all it needs. It should be able to pick up the rest of it. And at this point now I'm going to click on keep, and keep is going to be, like I said, free from the mask, so the mask will not be picking up on this area. So again, I just need to make sure that every kind of like tone or tonal value is just represented in this kind of broad selection that I'm doing, and it's very rough, but it should be enough for it to get going. So the important thing really is if there's any big things that are in the pictures, make sure they're all kind of represented somewhat in this squiggly selection. So what I want to do now is just hit apply, and this will basically get ON1 thinking and figuring out exactly what I want to do. Now you can see from these two colors here that one is the red is going to be where the mask is, and the green is where the photo will stay intact, so there's no mask in there. So that's at this point I just want to basically say that the AI masking tool is really it's a starting point. Even though it does save you a lot of time, it's not going to be a one and done thing. You are going to have to refine it. In this current state, it's kind of hard to see exactly what work needs to be done, so we'll tackle that in a little bit. In the meantime, I'm just going to hit done. And what this is going to show me is it's going to show me the mask, which actually has nothing in it right now, so it will actually show it as transparent. So let's take a look. Okay, so basically what it's done is it's cut out the sky, because we defined the sky as the mask, and the mask is at full opacity right now, meaning that it's basically just going to cut out the sky, and there's no effect on there right now. It looks like it was pretty good initial selection, but I won't be able to see that until I put something underneath it. So what I want to do now is I want to find myself a new sky. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going into extras and ON1 extras, and then backgrounds and skies. And let me see. I think I'm just going to check this, to use this sky and see how that works out. Okay, so it has placed the layer above my foreground layer. This is going to be the background layer, but right now it's in the front. We'll adjust that in a second. What I'm going to do is go up to the Move tool and just make sure that it's sized roughly correctly. Now, if I was doing this outside of a tutorial, I'd be getting a sky that would really work with this scene, and it would be about the same resolution. It's not the case necessarily for this tutorial, but I just want to give you an idea. So what I'm doing here is I'm stretching, as you can see, I'm just stretching it over any area that is going to show through with that other layer. So that looks good right there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this layer, just drag it underneath, and it becomes the background layer. Now that looks pretty good as far as the selection is concerned, but what we'll do is we'll just take a quick look at it here. Right, and it looks pretty good, and in the interest of time I'm actually not going to refine it too much, but I will just show you how to do that. So I would go, in this case, it's kind of like pretty sharp edges here that probably look, it makes it not look natural. So in order to make it blend a little bit better with the background, what I would do is click on the Refine tool. And make sure that you are actually on the layer that has the mask defined, which is the foreground layer in this case, not the background layer. If you start painting right now on that background layer, nothing's going to happen because there's actually no mask. So you're painting over the mask. So the idea behind this Refine tool is it's just going to blend it, and you can really kind of take a big clump here. You don't have to be too fussy about exactly where you're going. Well, I don't want to go way up there, but you get the idea here. So just for this section here, I'm just going to let that do its thing. And you can see that that is actually a little bit nicer than that sharp edge. And sometimes the initial selection will also cause haloing, and you've got that kind of glow around the edges, and the Refine tool will fix that. So it's just a case of really just going over that a few times at the edges until all that's done. So I'm actually going to do that right now and come back in a second. Okay, so I just ran the Refine brush over everything, and we can do a lot more work on it, but again, just in the interest of time in the demo, I just wanted to let you know what the process is, and if this were a real project for me, I'd be spending a lot more time on it. But anyway, so at this point now we have two layers. So we have the foreground layer, which has the house and the road and everything on it, and then we have the background layer, which has the sky. And they don't really match right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the sky layer and go to the develop area, hit the module here, and then we can just make a few adjustments. I'm just going to warm that up a bit, and I'm going to bring down the highlights because it's just pretty close to clipping there. And maybe bring the temperature up a little bit more, maybe not. Don't want to get too pink in the clouds. That's pretty good, so we'll take a look at that. Now at this point I am ready to start adding some effects to this image, and in order to do that, what I have to do is I basically have to flatten these layers and work on one image that has the sky and the foreground together in one layer. Otherwise I'm going to be putting effects on the sky and then the foreground separately, which is not what I want. Now I don't necessarily want to flatten these either. I don't want to merge them into one file, because for whatever reason, if I want to go back and change it, I want to have that option. So what I do is I right click on the topmost layer and I go down to new stamped layer. and click on that. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to take those two underlying layers and create a brand new one that's flattened, that has the sky and the foreground in one image, which is exactly what I want. So like I said, if I need to go back at any point and redo the mask or whatever, I can always do that. But this flattened file will allow me to start working on the entire image in effects. Okay, so now we can go to effects. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to add a black and white filter. And I don't want to do this because I want it to be a black and white photo. I just want to do it because it kind of desaturates the image. And that's kind of what I want for the look. And I'd say probably around there is pretty good. And actually, before I go any further, let me just crop this because I want this to be a 4:5 crop. And I just like to work on what the crop is going to look like rather than having this extra parts around the image. So I'm just going to push in very slightly here, like that. Maybe bring that up a tiny bit more. And then hit enter to commit to that. Okay, so I like that. So, like I said, the black and white filter is in there just really to kind of desaturate slightly the image, and I like that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another filter, and again I'm going to add a black and white filter. And this time I'm going to do it, I'm going to leave everything as is. I'm going down to the toner itself. This is just for toning. And I'm going to choose this favorite color of mine, this antique yellow, and bring down the opacity on this. And it just gives it a tone that I kind of like. So actually, I'm doing the entire opacity there. Sorry about that. I need to go. That's something actually, now that I mention it, and now that I've done it, you need to be aware of. This slider, this opacity slider right under the effects tab, that's for all of the effects together that you've done. So when you bring the opacity down, you are bringing the opacity down on however many layers you've done. So, but that's not what I want this time. I want to go into the black and white layer and bring that down a bit. And maybe about there. So when I take that off, you can see the difference that that's making. And I just kind of gives it a kind of a faded, maybe antique-y look. I don't know. I like it anyway. So what I'm not going to do next is I want to bring out some of the details in the road here and some of the texture in the wall. So I want to apply the dynamic contrast, but I want to do that selectively. So we're going to do that with the mask. So I'm going to click on the dynamic contrast and just crank up the detail in the medium and the large. Now obviously that's way too much. Obviously that does not work for the entire image. So what we'll do is we'll click on the mask icon, get into the mask, and then I'm going to invert the mask. And inverting the mask means that you've essentially made it invisible. So now I can go to my masking brush, which is already selected, and if I hold down the Shift and the X key, I can now paint in, which is what I want to do. I basically want to paint in the effect. So the dynamic contrast is invisible until I use this brush to paint it in. The opacity I'm going to bring up to about 60 or so. Leave the feather about 34 where it is, and then just kind of paint this in here. And I don't start with 100 just because this is a pretty intense effect, and I'd rather just kind of build it up. So there's just kind of little areas here that I want emphasized. Just some of the textures here on the walls and over here probably. And just more of that stuff here, just kind of leading the viewer's eye. And maybe just a little dash over here. Not much. Okay, so that's good, I'd say. That's before. Keep an eye on the road there and after. So you can see on the crack. A crack actually might be a little bit too much. So if I do Shift X and then I paint this out, it's just having the opposite effect. It's just a little bit too intense there. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is add another filter, and it's going to be textures. And I'm just going to choose one from the monochrome collection here. Just that one probably. And I want to go from subtle to, let's see, subtle to, yeah, we'll just leave it at subtle then. Okay, and I'm just going to bring that down a bit. So when I turn that off, you'll notice that it actually has added quite a bit of brightness to the image. So there is a brightness slider inside this texture, so I'm going to bring that down. And that's probably going to bring it back to where it was roughly, yeah. Okay, so I kind of like how that looks. So the idea here is well, obviously it's there to create a mood in the photograph, but it has another reason or benefit, and that is to basically take the viewer's awareness away from the blended images. The sky and the foreground, the more effects that they have in common that are being layered over them, the more they blend together. So that's part of the intention here. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add a vignette. So let's add another filter here and go to vignette. And let's go for the big softy here. Now that's too much for me down. I'm going to undo that. Control Z. That's a little bit much. Well, actually, I'm going to put it back on. Sorry. Let's see. Yeah, so we're going to do big softy. Okay, and what I'm going to do actually is I'm going into the mask. And I want to do less of the effect down by the road, like in the bottom half of the picture. I want really the effect to be more dominant on the top part of the picture. So what I want to do is I go to the mask icon and then go up here to the masking bug, which is like this gradient tool. And we are going to put the opacity around 45%. And when I click on that, that's not what I want. It's the other way. It's the, let's see, linear top, I think. And again, let's do the mask about 40%. I'm trying to get to it, and I'll tell you why I'm doing this. I think I just did the same thing. So linear bottom, maybe. Okay. This always confuses me, to be honest, because it doesn't seem like it's logical the way it's named. So 40%, and then I'll click it around here, and yeah, that's what I want. So if you look at the mask, we can view the mask here. Basically what's happening is the white represents the 100% effect, and then the gray means that it's fading out. If it were to go to black, you wouldn't see the effect at all, because black in a mask is basically, you know, it's punching through it, so it's you're seeing right through it. It's transparent. When it's white, it's at its full effect. So to get back to the picture, basically what's happening is I'm just putting less of the effect at the bottom, which is again what I want, because it was just getting too dark. And overall, I'd probably just bring down the opacity slightly on the effect. But I do like that, so that's before and that's after. So the next thing that I want to add is a tone enhancer, and I'm doing that just because I want to make sure that there's nothing that needs to be kind of tweaked in the tones. Like if I brought the shadows up a tiny bit, maybe kind of increase the contrast. It's very subtle, really. That's it. So that's before. Can we even see the difference? Doesn't even look like it. Yeah, it's just there. It's just subtle. Anyway. I just sometimes use the tone enhancer just to do the smallest little tweaks, because the tones can be changed up with all the layers that are going on here. So the next thing that I want to put on here is, we're getting towards the end of this, by the way, is the sunshine filter. And that just adds a little bit of contrast and a little bit of warmth, and I kind of like what that's doing, except that it's probably a little bit much on the clouds there. It looks like it's blowing those out slightly, so I'll just bring it down a little bit. and the histogram looks like it's good. So again, what I'll do is I'm going to go back to the textures here because I still feel like that's a little strong. So I'm going to pull back on that and just have it a little cleaner. Okay. And then the sunshine looks good to me. So the final filter that I'm going to put on here is the film grain. And I'm just a fan of film grain in general. But again, this also serves that dual purpose of giving it a certain mood, but also kind of binding those two images together again so that they look a little bit more seamless. So with the film grain, make sure that you're looking at it at 100% because it actually looks much bigger in the small preview than it really is, the grain. So you can see that that is, it looks a lot smaller than it does in the when it's a small preview. So that looks good to me. Alright, so let's take a look. I'm just going to show you where we came from. I'm going to click on this original layer here and go to the mask and reset that. And that will show me what it was like beforehand. So if I close this layer or uncheck it, that's where we started, and that's where we are right now. So, you know, the type of sky you put in can make a big difference. You have to make sure it's realistic. You have to think about what angle was the original sky taken from, and also what direction is the light. It's not all correct on this particular sky, and I would be a lot more judicious in terms of what I chose. But again, just wanted to show you what this what you know the program is capable of. One other thing that I would add is that the order of the layers of effects that you put in, some people say it doesn't matter. I disagree, it does matter. The reason why is if you put texture and grain and all that stuff, and then you put a dynamic contrast on top of that, the dynamic contrast is not only going to make your picture crunchier, it's also going to make your texture more crunchy, it's going to make your grain more dominant. So I tend to put those kinds of effects at the very top of the layer because then they're not being affected by those kinds of sharpening filters. So that's just a tip there. So that's it. I wanted to draw your attention really to the new AI masking tool, and what I showed you here is pretty basic. And I mean, it's funny, you see people doing these things all the time online, and their selections are usually fairly simple, like mine was with the sky. I mean, it was pretty much flat blue, so it wasn't really intensely difficult. But once you get the basics down, you can try things that are more difficult. And the thing about doing these more kind of difficult examples is they just are really time consuming for tutorials. So it just doesn't make sense to do it that way. But hopefully it's inspired you to try that tool and see if it works for you on some level. The other funny thing I'll just mention really briefly is that this new AI tool, masking tool, has actually made a lot of my earlier tutorials redundant because you don't have to go through all the steps that I've demonstrated, but there are other people that have the older version of ON1 that it's still useful for. Anyway, I'll try not to take so long between posting tutorials in the future, so thanks to everyone for hanging in there. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing in general, please consider subscribing to my channel. So until next time, thanks for watching.